Keep yourself in the loop of everything football on the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast. The latest news on and off the field, be it college football, Big Ten, SEC, Big 12, Pac-12, ACC to the NFL. We've got you covered. Listen to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast.
Hello and welcome. What's going on, everybody? Welcome to the GSMC Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Bryan here with you again. Glad you can join me today. Glad you can join us. Happy Monday. On this edition, it's May 24th, 2021, and we got a lot to talk about. We have a lot, not only to talk about in the world we live in, but in the sports world as well. There's so much to talk about. But first, I just hope everyone had a great weekend. I hope everyone was able to enjoy this beautiful weather we're having. And I'm super excited because I'm fully vaccinated and it's just a great time to get to where we're going to be. And it's a great time to experience those things we used to experience before this whole thing with the pandemic has done to our lives and has changed our lives. But like I said before, there's a lot to talk about. And this is GSMC Football Podcast, so you come here for football. If you're a leatherhead, if you love to get your hands dirty, you've come to the right place. We're going to talk about a lot regarding the NFL and all this drama that's happening over the NFL season, off-season. And we're also going to talk about the trades and the big-time names wanting to move cities. There's been a lot today, especially today, Monday, that is broke regarding big-time players in big-time cities wanting to move teams. And there's a lot to talk about. There's a lot to speculate. I'm excited to talk about it. I hope you guys are excited about this as well as I am. OTAs, organized team activities, start today. Get excited. We're one step closer to getting to having actual football on the field. We got the preseason schedule already released, so we know which teams are going to be playing which teams in the preseason. It's just one step closer. So we're going to get into a lot today regarding NFL. We're going to get into mini camps and training camps and the possibilities of big-time players moving big-time cities and trying to improve their franchises and trying to say, you know what? I'm out of here. We're going to get more on that. We're going to get into the Julio Jones situation. We're going to get into the Deshaun Watson situation because that was been bubbling ever since he wanted to be released and he wanted to be traded from the Houston Texans. And we're just going to get into a lot regarding where these teams could benefit from these players. And we're going to get into the way too early predictions for some people. And we're also going to get into some of the aspects we loved that we're going to get back with slowly but surely getting back to normal, especially in the sports world. So I'm super excited to talk about everything football and everything sports, and I hope you guys are too. Remember, I'm Bryan here. It's the GSMC Football Podcast. Let's get straight into it, shall we? So, the major news today, May 24th, Monday, May 24th, was a call about Julio Jones. So now, if you don't follow Sports Talk Radio or the Talking Heads, Shannon Sharp and Skip Bayless, two media professionals, two media analysts for the Fox Sports Network, have a show together, and today they called Julio Jones on his future in Atlanta. So this is huge. They actually got him to call. So Shannon Sharp is the uncle of Julio Jones, live on the Undisputed. That's their channel. That's their show. And there's some huge news that just broke, too. So Julio said he's out of there when asked if he wants to stay in Atlanta. He also said he doesn't want to go to the Cowboys. He specifically said, I want to win. Whoa. Holy cow. I don't think he knew that he was first on live television, because he broke this news on live national television with millions of people watching. It's crazy. Now, if I was a journalist and I was like I am, and if I saw somebody, I would first say, hey, before you say anything, I want you to know you're on live national television. I think Shannon Sharp, he's a great analyst. He has some great takes, but I think he was in the wrong there for a second. He needs to let the people that you're talking to be aware of the situation. Now, there's so many big factors when it comes to the Julio Jones trade. One major factor that I look at to the Falcons trading them is the cap space. The cap space for many different teams is very limited, and a lot of teams have spent over the offseason. One team, for example, the New England Patriots. They spent a ton of money over the offseason to acquire talent. Now, a big factor in any Julio Jones trade, is that Julio is guaranteed $15.3 million on his salary this year. So there's not a lot of teams out there on the market right now who can afford that cap space for Julio Jones. Among the teams with that cap space, potentially to take such a salary hit, are 4 teams I keep in mind. One is the Patriots. They're at $16.4 million. So they're going to have to do some cap space shuffle. Another one is the San Francisco 49ers. They're at $17.5 million. So they're also with the Patriots, who are also going to have to do a cap space shuffle. And we're going to get into them in a little while. But also you got the Colts at $19.6 million in cap space. So they're up there with the cap space number. They can afford him, but they're going to have to maneuver slightly less than the 49ers and the Patriots. But keep one in mind. I almost said the San Diego Chargers. The Los Angeles Chargers. They're at $21.4 million. They have a lot of cap space. And they have some great weapons. Just think. This was a sleeper. This was a sleeper team who I didn't think had a chance to land him. But go to a big city like Los Angeles. You play with a young stud quarterback in Justin Herbert. You have a great offensive line. You have a great running back duo with Austin Eckler. And you have one of the most underrated wide receivers in the game right now in Keenan Allen. So you pair Keenan Allen with Julio Jones. Oh my gosh. The AFC West might be stacked with talent. That might be the Wild Wild West shootout we've all been waiting for. Now that's crazy. Not just thinking right now. If you can get Julio on that team, that would be scary. They might be, I told you before, they've been a sleeper, the Chargers. They're a sleeper to win the AFC West, I think. I think the Kansas City Chiefs are going to go through a Super Bowl hangover and go through that Super Bowl curse and of losing the Super Bowl the next year. They've been on a wild ride. They have a lot of talent, but I think the Chargers, they're that one team who, if they can just get that one piece to pair with Keenan Allen on offense, you already got a dominant running back. You already have a number one wide receiver. If you can add another one, and you have a young quarterback who I think might win MVP in a couple years because he's got a great arm. I saw him live in person when he played. I think it was some random bowl game in college. I think there's too many, but I saw him live at Levi Stadium, and he looked all of it. 6'5", 6'6", 240, strong arm, and he made some throws I couldn't believe in college, and he just got even better. We all saw what he did last year with Los Angeles Chargers. We all saw Justin Herbert's improvement. Now can he take that next step? That's the thing I would see about these rookie quarterbacks. Like, I'm going to take, for example, Joe Burrow. I'm going to take, for example, Justin Herbert. I'm going to take, for example, Tua Tagovailoa. These are all 3 quarterbacks who need to improve from their seasons past. If Tua Tagovailoa, if Joe Burrow, if Justin Herbert, now 2 of them were injured. That's no fault of their own, but 2 of them were injured. If they can take that next step, and if they can really see how their improvements over the offseason, over the training camp, over the OTAs have come from previous years and take that experience, I think this league, when it comes to quarterbacks, it's going to be a great league. And we're already seeing the next great quarterbacks in this league. We've seen the great quarterbacks almost retire. We got Tom Brady at age 43. We got Aaron Rodgers winning MVPs at age 37. But when it comes to the young quarterbacks, I'm super excited to see how they develop, and especially with the rookies. I'm excited to see how Trevor Lawrence is going to be able to compete with these NFL defenses. I'm excited to see if Zach Wilson is actually going to make an impact in New York. I've already stated my thoughts about Wilson. I don't think he's going to do great when it comes to producing on the field, because the Jets have the worst roster in the NFL. They have the worst talent in the NFL. But I'm excited to see what happens. And I'm excited to see if Trey Lance for the San Francisco 49ers, if he's going to get on the field. Now, I know they're paying Jimmy Garoppolo $26.3 million this year, and that hurts them in the cap. But like I said before, the 49ers have $17.5 million in cap space. Now, I'm just talking. If you want, this is just a speculation. I'm a big Jimmy G fan. I have to state this fact. I'm a big Jimmy G fan. I like where his development is. You give him a couple more years under that system. I'm a big Jimmy Garoppolo fan. But there's been rumblings where if the 49ers cut him or they trade him, they get rid of that $26.5 million in cap space. They already drafted a number 1 QB with their number 1 draft this year. They gave up 4 draft picks just to pick a young kid. I could see them going for Julio. Now, Julio, he's going to have to take $15.3 million guaranteed, but you have him constructed underneath that contract for at least 3 years. And maybe, who knows, when he gets a new change of scenery, like we talked about in previous segments with Sam Darnold having a new change of scenery in Carolina, when he gets a new change of scenery, he can... It really helps when it comes to your ideologies and your thought process when signing a contract. You want to give the other team, the new team you're going to, the benefit of the doubt, and you want to help them out. Because it's honestly all about winning. So if he sees that there's so much talent on that roster already, with George Kittle, with Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk, Raheem Mostert, Jeff Wilson Jr., Trent Williams with the offensive line, and the fullback Pro Bowler Kyle Juszczyk, with 2 good quarterbacks in Jimmy Garoppolo and a great up-and-coming young quarterback in Trey Lance, I think if you're Julio Jones, I'm taking the Tim Duncan route. Now, for those of you who don't follow basketball, Tim Duncan is one of the best power forwards, if not the best power forward of all time. Now, he's underrated, and he's not as valued as like Larry Bird because he's not as athletic as all these superstars today like Kevin Durant or LeBron James. But Tim Duncan, I think most people should understand his thought process. He won 5 championships for the San Antonio Spurs. Now, he won those championships because he took a pay cut. Now, I know there's a lot of ego when it comes to taking less money. But you know what? If you have to put aside getting less money or changing that and getting all the money in the world but having less talent around you, I'd rather might take the latter. I'd rather might take the opposite route of, okay, you can take more money, but you're going to have less talent around you, and it's going to be harder for you to win. It's going to be harder for you to win multiple championships, nevertheless one. We all seen the talent of Julio Jones. He might be better than Calvin Johnson. Physically, he looks dominant. His route running skills is impeccable. His feet are great. His hand skills are so soft and so great that they're NFL Pro Bowl Hall of Fame level. When it's all said and done, he might end up in Canton one day, even if he doesn't win a Super Bowl. But I think he's going to win a Super Bowl wherever he goes to, if he goes to a contender. Say he goes to the San Francisco 49ers and they have to give up a first-round pick, which we'll get into that later. I think he might win a Super Bowl within the next couple of years. That's how good he is. See, he's a perennial talent. You don't get those talents every single day. Just like those talents don't come walking off the street. I said this before with the Aaron Rodgers situation. If you have to make a decision when it comes to, do I keep the player? Do I keep the GM? Do I keep the head coach? I'm always going to take the player. I don't care how much you have to give up for him. If you have to give him a number 2 and 2 threes and a 4th round draft pick to get a perennial all-star who will make you win now, if you can win 2 to 3 to 4 championships right now in a 5-year window, if you can expand that window, I'm taking him. And you know what? Kyle Shanahan said something really interesting about that. We'll get on to the other side. But first, I am taking Julio Jones, and you know Atlanta's going to want to trade him now. Even though how much they don't want to, they're going to have to because he's unhappy. And he's not going to report. So what do you give up for him? If I'm Atlanta, and I see this perennial all-star, and I see this young kid coming in Kyle Pitts, and I have a young, youthful roster in Calvin Ridley, and all these offensive playmakers on Atlanta with a MVP quarterback in Matt Ryan, when healthy, they could be scary. I've stated on this show before that if they're healthy and Julio Jones stays in that core, they can be scoring 54 to 55 points a game. Now, we all know Atlanta needs help on defense. We all do. We all saw it last year. We all saw it in the Super Bowl when they gave up that 28-3 lead in the Super Bowl against the New England Patriots back in 2018. We all saw that. We all saw the memes. We all see the memes on Twitter, on Facebook, on Instagram. We all see it. But if I'm Atlanta, I'm asking for a haul. Now, it's funny. It's interesting. I see reports that Atlanta can't get a first-round pick for Julio Jones. This is Julio Jones we're talking about. We're not talking about some scrub second-string wide receiver who wants out of Pittsburgh or who wants out of Cleveland. We're talking one of the best wide receivers to ever play the game. We're talking a guy with Calvin Johnson numbers. Just look at the numbers. Just look at the numbers and tell me you won't trade a first-round pick for this guy. Because, honestly, that's what they're going to want. And if I was Atlanta, I would want for a first-round pick, a second-round pick, and a third-round pick. It's just crazy to me that sometimes these media professionals, I said this before, you can't get it to the hype. You can't get caught up. These media professionals said they don't think that Atlanta can get Julio Jones for a first-round pick. It's crazy. It really is crazy. This guy's a perennial all-star. Now, he's 32 years old, but you got to look at age 32, when Jerry Rice, for example, he still had 11,119 yards and 85 touchdowns in front of him. Now, I'm not saying Julio Jones is Jerry Rice, but we should view Hall of Famers in a different lens when it comes to the potential production versus age, based on what he speaks of Jones and what Shannon Sharpe says. There's a lot to think about when it comes to the Julio Jones aspect and Julio Jones trade. And I tell you this, by the end of this show, we're probably not going to be done with talking to Julio Jones. By the end of this show, we're probably going to be talking about how other teams can be impacted with Julio Jones. And you know what? We're going to be talking about him along with Deshaun Watson, Aaron Rodgers, and everything that's going on with OTAs. It just goes to show that we crave every little detail, every little breaking news segment of the NFL. Like, we're so excited to have the NFL back in our lives, and we're so excited to have this joy and this feeling of actual football on the field. Like, we're talking about football, but we haven't seen any of the physical people on the field in a game situation. Practice have started, mini camps have started, OTAs just began, and we're one step closer, and I'm super excited about that. And I know you are too, because we're one step closer to getting back to reality. Some people are already back to reality. Some people are not wearing any masks. Some people are fully vaccinated like me. Hope everyone gets vaccinated. Get your shots. We can get back to normal. We can get back to what we loved to do. And it's going to be interesting to see how this story unfolds. It's going to be interesting to see where all these big time players are going to be moving and where all these big time names are going to go. You know what else is going to be interesting? To see how the Deshaun Watson aspect of free agency and where he wants to go. Because he's not a free agent right now, but he wants out in Houston. And I'm super excited to see. And we're going to talk about more about the Julio Jones and what his former coach had to say. And we're going to also talk about the Deshaun Watson factor and how it can turn the balance of power in the NFL on its head. So if you love all this drama right now and you can't wait for the NFL to start, stay tuned. We got you covered on the other side. It's the GSMC Football Podcast. I'm Bryan with you. Stay tuned.
Are you looking for help for your fantasy football team? Check out the GSMC Fantasy Football Podcast. Get today's best advice on who to start, who to sit, even who you should draft. From sleeper picks to red hot lineups, they got it all covered for you. That's gsmcpodcast.com/fantasy-football-podcast. We'll cover traditional leagues, dynasty, PPR, even IDP leagues. When you need fantasy help, there's just one show to hit up. Don't forget to like them on Facebook and follow them on Twitter. Visit gsmcpodcast.com for more info.
Hey now, welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Bryan here with you again. Glad you can join us. Happy to be here. Happy Monday, everybody. Hopefully everyone had a great weekend. Now, previously, we talked about the drama and the big-time stories that broke this morning about the Julio Jones trade, and we talked about the young QBs in this draft and where some of these big-time players and big-time names will end up. And we talked briefly about it, but we're going to get into what happens with another big name in the NFL, a QB, Deshaun Watson, and see where he goes in this segment. But we're going to continue on talking about the Julio Jones trade that could be, and what team I specifically think that he would look great in. Now, like I mentioned before in previous segments, I'm a Bay Area sports fan. I love my Niners, Warriors, Giants, Sharks. But I think, honestly, that Julio Jones would be a great fit anywhere he goes. Any system he goes to, Julio Jones will be a great fit. Now, today the news broke on Shannon Sharp's and Skip Bayless's show, The Undisputed, that Julio Jones, he wants out of there. He actually picked up the phone for Shannon Sharp and he talked to him on the air. I don't think he knew he was on the air, but he said he wants out of there. So I'm thinking some destinations, we already know this. We already knew Julio Jones wanted out of there, but he had proof. He solidified that he specifically wants out of there. Now, I'm thinking, what are some places that could be great for him? My immediate reaction is, you know what? His former offensive coordinator for the 49ers is now the head coach. His former offensive coordinator in Atlanta is now the head coach for the San Francisco 49ers. Now, we talked about cap space, and cap space has a lot to do with trades and a lot to do with free agency. If you don't have cap space, you're not going to be able to get the people you want. It's just like if you don't have enough money to go and buy that candy bar or to go and buy that new toy you always wanted. If you don't have enough money, you're going to have to save and you're going to have to budget. And if you don't have enough money as a franchise, you're not going to be able to get good players, superstar players, especially perennial type talent like Julio Jones. Now, San Francisco 49ers, they don't have much cap space, and those other teams probably don't either. But since the 49ers numbers doesn't include the bill from the draft class, this year's draft class, which is about $11 million, they'd have to restructure deals or get Atlanta to pay part of Julio's contract, which is possible. Now, they're all businessmen at the end of the day. GMs, head coaches, owners. It's a business. So they want to get the best deal out of anybody. Because at the end of the day, they're businessmen and they don't want to look foolish. But what is facts is that Julio Jones, his time in Atlanta appears to be done. And it's crazy to think that a perennial all-star who's one of the best, if not the best wide receiver in the league right now, they may be done. So if Jones' day as a Falcon are indeed numbered, the 49ers would be an interesting landing spot. And you know what? Vegas points bet, the Points Bet Colorado has the San Francisco 49ers listed as the betting favorite to grab the star pass catcher at minus 450. So if you want to bet $100, you can win $450. Now the Indianapolis Colts are also there at minus 475, and the Chargers are also there at 475. Ravens are plus 600, and Patriots are plus 700. And those are the top 5 teams that Vegas thinks that Julio will land in. It's going to be interesting. I thought in previous segment, I stated that could be a scary offense when it comes to the Chargers. With Justin Herbert, with Austin Eckler, with the star wide receiver already, Keenan Allen, and you add Julio Jones to the mix, they could compete with Kansas City. There's a lot of firepower in the AFC West. Just like the NFC West. The West seems to have the best teams and the best talent around them. Everybody wants to move out west. And it's crazy. Now, trade rumors have swirled around the 32-year-old receiver for the last few weeks. But it's just really interesting to see about cap space. Now, we're looking at the cap space for the 49ers specifically right now. They currently have $17.6 million in salary cap space. But the thing with the San Francisco 49ers is they still haven't signed all of their draft picks from this year. They still haven't signed Trey Lance, who they traded 4 picks to get for number 3 overall this year. They still haven't signed their 3rd-round pick, running back Trey Sermon out of Ohio State, who might be a great fantasy pickup and a great pickup in general for the 49ers. With the amount of injuries they have on that team at the running back position, look for Trey Sermon in your fantasy teams this year. He might be a scary addition as a rookie. And they also have to sign cornerback Ambry Thomas, who also got a 3rd-round pick from Michigan. So I think that puts them in the neighborhood of about $10 million. Now, entering age 32, like I mentioned before, Jerry Rice had a great season. He got 85 touchdowns for almost 12,000 yards. So he had that in front of him at 32. Now, there's some pros and cons to adding Julio to the 49ers. Now, I'm specifically talking about the 49ers. There's the Shanahan factor, like I mentioned before. Now, Shanahan, if you didn't know, was the Falcons' offensive coordinator in 2015-2016 during the Julio Jones only All-Pro season. Now, that being said, he was only All-Pro because he's been injured. He was nursing a hamstring injury last season, which kept him out almost half the season. But noting how rarely elite players surface, Shanahan said something really interesting, especially in 2018 at the scouting combine. So some people asked him about if there's like a star player out there. And he said really something interesting. He quoted, "If there's a Julio available and you have the opportunity to get him, you go and get him. It is worth it." That's interesting. Just ponder that for a second. Just sit back and say, wow. Now, is that just coach speak? That he can throw off his competitors? Like we all saw when he threw off everybody in the media when it comes to the Mac Jones Or can you trust him? You have to be the deciding factor of that. No one's going to tell you if you can trust anybody. But honestly, whatever the price is, whatever the draft pick is, there aren't too many Julio Joneses on this planet. I can think of 5 guys right now who can be in that conversation right now in the league, who are Julio Jones's type and who can be up there with Julio Jones. I'm thinking Odell Beckham Jr. I'm thinking Julio Jones. I'm thinking DeAndre Hopkins. I'm thinking Keenan Allen. And those really are the 4 guys, along with A.J. Brown out of Tennessee, who are really just leading the way right now when it comes to wide receivers. Now you got rookies like Justin Jefferson out there in Minnesota, and you got other rookies who I'm super excited to see about when it comes to the rookies in this class. I'm super excited to see Devontae Smith in Philly, and I'm excited to see his counterpart from college, who's supposed to be better than him, in Miami with Tua Tagovailoa. If you have a Julio Jones type, at the end of the day, just like Shanahan said, if there's a Julio available, you go and get him. No matter what. No matter how many draft picks. Now, it has to be a reason. Of course you're going to give up a first-round draft pick for this guy. Just look at the stats. So, he is super productive. Jones ranks first among all wide receivers in NFL history with an average of 95.5 yards per game. That's crazy to me. In NFL history, out of all the great NFL wide receivers that have ever played the game, we're talking, he's better than Calvin Johnson. He's better than Jerry Rice. He's better than Lynn Swann, Terrell Owens, Keyshawn Johnson. These big-time Hall of Fame type guys. He ranks better than all of them. Now, the game has changed over the years, and people will say, oh, they weren't able to do the things we were able to do, and they got away with holding on defense and a lot of these big hits. Okay, yeah, but he's doing it right now. So just the number 2 guy, Calvin Johnson. You got to remember, he's a great time player, but he only averaged 86.1 yards per game. And number 10, Jerry Rice, arguably one of the greatest, if not the best player to ever play the game, he only averaged 75.6 yards per game. So Jones averaged last year, being limited to 9 games with a hamstring injury, 85.7. That's crazy. That's crazy. But you know what? In a 49ers aspect, that 85.7, and those 771 yards would have led the 49ers in wide receivers yards by far. Now, we all know with the 49ers, they had $82.9 million on the roster injured last year. So when you take half their guys who were injured, we're talking Pro Bowlers like Kyle Juszczyk, we're talking Pro Bowlers like George Kittle, Nick Bosa, Fred Warner, Deebo Samuel, Brandon Ayuk. These are household names. Julio Jones would bring a veteran presence to that locker room that would help, especially the young wide receivers. Now, the 49ers have had a band of starters and rising stars come up together in Brandon Ayuk and Deebo Samuel, and they just are great young receivers. But they don't have that veteran presence that they need. Julio Jones would bring them that veteran presence. He would compliment them so much, and he would lead them and guide them to see how to act, especially in a Kyle Shanahan system. We're thinking Julio Jones went to a Super Bowl with Kyle Shanahan, and we're thinking these 2 young wide receivers also went to a Super Bowl, so they would have stuff in common. Now, last year's injury for the 49ers needed as much firepower as they could. With the injuring causes of the 49ers, they were just too injury prone. And that's part of the lack of training, lack of physical conducting training, and that's also part of the Super Bowl curse. Now, entering today's start of organized team activities, which I'm super excited about because a lot of these teams are going back to OTAs. The mystery abounds who will emerge from the pack of suspect receivers in San Francisco. The most likely candidate would be either Richie James or Travis Benjamin. Okay, those are veteran guys. But you know what? Julio Jones is out there. Julio Jones is out there. And if you have a chance to get Julio, you get him. You just get him no matter what. Now, some of the costs and some of the cons would be a high cost. Now, the 49ers already mortgaged their future draft capital by trading up 4 picks just to get one player in Trey Lance. Now, with every draft pick, it's a high risk reward. They're betting that Trey Lance is going to be the risk and there's going to be the great reward for their risk. Now, you also have to think of the health factor. Now, in any sports, what is the best ability for any sport athlete? Any athlete, any sport, what's the best ability? Now, this may seem cheesy. I've heard this over and over and over again, and it's worn out in my brain, and I hate when people say this, but you know what? It's right. It is correct. The best ability in sports is availability. The best ability is availability. I can't have you catching passes on the sidelines in a walking boot and some crutches with your hat pinned backwards. If you can't produce for me on the field, then you are not a produceful and you are not a factor within my team. I need you to be healthy on the field. Now, football especially, injuries are inevitable. We just know that. We know injuries are inevitable. But you're going to have to stay healthy. You're going to have, everybody plays hurt. There's a difference between playing hurt and playing injured. If you have a couple boo-boos, if you have a couple owies, yeah, we know it. It hurts. Take some Tylenol, take some painkillers, and get out there on the field. You're going to be a hell of a lot useful to our roster to helping us win a championship if you're out there on the field dominating like you know you can, rather than sitting on the sidelines with a Gatorade cup in your hand, eating some seeds, with your backwards hat on some crutches because you can't walk because you have a broken foot. Now, if you have a broken foot, by all means, you need to take care of yourself. But if you're able to play, you have to play. It's as simple as that. It's the NFL, people. This isn't college. This isn't high school where, oh, my arm hurts. No. If you're available to play, you need to play. That's the best way you're going to be able to affect your team. Because we all know you're a superstar talent. We all know that this guy is a perennial all-star. But if you can't go on the field, if you can't produce for me, your value diminishes in the league. It really does. So there's a lot of pros and cons that come into the Julio Jones trade and wanting Julio as a team player. Now, I know a lot of teams are out there who need a number one wide receiver. Actually, every team needs a number one wide receiver out there in the league. But if you're not able to restructure your contracts and restructure some financial bearings, you're not going to be able to get this guy because he's going to cost a lot. But in the long run, it's worth it. Just like Kyle Shanahan said before. If there's a Julio out there available, you do whatever you can to get him. And I totally agree. Whatever the price is, whatever the draft pick is, go get him. Because right now, you just aren't guaranteed. We aren't guaranteed anything in this life. We know this. Looking back at the pandemic, we had no idea that we were going to go through this. And we weren't guaranteed life. Millions of people have lost loved ones. Now, I know this is a football podcast and we're talking about the NFL and we're talking about a child sport. And I get so passionate about it because there's just this feeling inside me that relates back to real world and relates so well with the sports world, especially in the NFL. NFL, you're not given anything. Nothing is guaranteed. Just like these contracts, just like playing time, just like winning It's not guaranteed. You have to go and work for it. It's just like when you go to a job. You're not guaranteed the hours. You're not guaranteed to stay there. But you're not guaranteed to do well in school. You have to put in the work in. And if there's an opportunity to make something of yourself, and there's an opportunity to get one of the greatest players, one of the greatest wide receivers of this generation, who might end up as one of the greatest wide receivers of all time, you have to go get him, no matter what the cost is. So I'm hearing that this guy isn't worth a first-round draft pick? Are you kidding me? You're telling me someone's not going to trade a first-round draft pick for this guy just because he's 32 and he had some injury issues? Get out of here with that nonsense. I'm sorry. If you want Julio Jones, you're going to have to break the bank. You're going to have to break the bank for this guy. Now, what I mean break the bank, you're going to have to spend at least a couple first-round draft picks, maybe a second-round draft pick, and a third-round draft pick. But you're going to have to give up a first-round draft pick. If you have the draft capital, you do it. No questions asked. If you have it, you do it. It's interesting to see what these people think on media and these draft analysts and these experts think about what is happening with this situation. Get out of here with me. They're not going to give up a first-round draft pick for Julio Jones. That's crazy. That is crazy. You know what else is... Speaking of crazy, you know what's crazy? The whole Deshaun Watson storyline. Is he going to stay in Houston? Is he not going to stay in Houston? Now, OTAs have started today. Organized team activities have started today. And so around this time, we like to play the game of who's opting out, who's not going to go. Because there's some people who believe that they don't want to be there, A, the team doesn't want him there, B, and he thinks that he can get more money than he actually deserves. And it's crazy to see, but it's also interesting. And it's crazy to think we're talking about OTAs over other sports like NBA playoffs, like the MLB regular season. But that's just how much we love football in this world, especially in America. That just shows how much football is king. And we're going to get into the Deshaun Watson aspect and storyline on the other side. So if you're interested about that and you're excited about OTA starting, we got you coming up on the other side. It's the GSMC Football Podcast. Stay tuned.
Tired of searching the vast jungle of podcasts? Now listen close and hear this out. There's a podcast network that covers just about everything that you've been searching. Hey! The Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network is here. Nothing less than a podcast bliss with endless hours of podcast coverage. From news, sports, music, fashion, cooking, entertainment, fantasy, football, and so much more. So stop lurking around and go straight out to the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. Guaranteed to fill that podcast itch. Whatever it may be. Visit us at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Follow us on Facebook and Twitter, and download us on iTunes, SoundCloud, and Google Play.
Hey now, what's going on? Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Bryan here with you again. Glad you can join me today. Happy Monday. I know everybody's tired. They're winded from this past weekend, and I just hope everyone had a nice, relaxing, safe, and enjoyable weekend. Now, in previous segments, we talked all about the NFL and the NFL trade season and off-season, and we talked about how OTAs are beginning today, and there's a lot to discuss, to talk about, to analyze. We finally get everybody who is not opting out, who's not opting out of their contract and opting out of going to training camp and going to organized team activities in their uniforms, in their padded practices. Now, there's some big-time names that don't want to show up for organized team activities, and it's crazy to me that these people are sacrificing what they are to get what they want. And we'll talk about more of that. We'll talk about the Deshaun Watson story, and we also talked about the Julio Jones trade rumors. It's basically the Julio Jones episode today, people. Big news. If you haven't heard the news, if you lived under a rock, if you don't follow social media, if this is how you get your important information for football, well then, thank you. We appreciate your kind words, your loving words, and we appreciate your support. But if you haven't heard the news, especially in the football world, superstar, perennial wide receiver Julio Jones from the Atlanta Falcons wants out of Atlanta. He went on today, the Undisputed, on FS1, Skip Bayless, Shannon Sharpe, their talk show rivaling First Take, and he went on and Shannon Sharpe actually called him. So Shannon Sharpe, if you don't know, is Julio Jones's family. I believe he's his uncle or something like that, but still, he went on their talk show today and he broke some major news. Now, I'm not sure if Julio Jones thought it was live, thought it was being a prank called on him but what happened was around 8 o'clock earlier this morning, Julio Jones went on their talk show because Shannon Sharpe physically called him and Julio picked up. I think he was driving his car somewhere. He was using his Bluetooth, but still, he picked up and right away he asked him, "Man, what's your situation? How are you going to deal with these trade rumors?" Now, Shannon and Julio, they're close, they're family, so it's kind of like he wasn't talking to a reporter, which he was. Intense, he was on a talk show, and he was talking to the media. A former player, though, a former NFL tight end, Shannon Sharpe, one of the greatest tight ends of all time for the Denver Broncos. Now, they're related to each other. Shannon's his uncle, apparently, and he got him to open up. He got Julio to open up on a personal level, like they know each other. They're family. Of course he's going to open up. And I thought, hey, this was genius. You had him. This was great content. And in a sense, it was. But, in a sense, when it comes to the journalist inside me, going to those journalism schools, when it comes to the journalist inside me, I thought it was kind of unprofessional, in my opinion. I mean, you have a superstar getting right to the point of your first question is, are you staying in Atlanta? Like, no hi, no how you doing, no how's your off season, what you doing right now, how's the family? Are you staying in Atlanta? I thought the way he treated it, Shannon Sharpe, in general. Now, he wants to be the bold, all-powerful alpha guy who poses the powerful questions, who everybody wants to talk about in the media world, and that's great and all. But to me, it didn't make sense that it wasn't fair to Julio to ask him those questions right off the spot. Like, yeah, you want to hit hard-hitting questions as a journalist. You do, and you have these guys who are alpha egos who know what they're worth. But when it comes to the morality and when it comes to the journalist in you, you have to navigate it better. Shannon, you have to navigate it better. And I just think, it wasn't the best way to handle the situation. He just flat out asked him 2 questions. He basically said, where are you going? Are you still going to be in Atlanta? And what Julio said on the phone was like, nah, man, I'm out of there. I'm out of there. And it was a huge story, huge news. You had major headlines all across the country, on every web page, on ESPN, you had it on CBS, on NBC. It was major news. It was headline news on NFL Network. And it's crazy. It's crazy, but that's the world we live in today. The world we live in today is crazy. It is pro-social media. And it's crazy to me how during this age of technology and this age of social media that we are so obsessed about where anybody's going, especially in today's sporting world. Like we love, like back then, before smartphones was a thing, back then when we can just enjoy our lives without having to take a picture or take a picture of our food every time we eat or try to tweet something or Snapchat somebody. We had a simple joy of enjoying sports without having to check our phones every time out or every minute or two to try to get the updates. Because honestly, that's all we do right now. And it's crazy to me that everybody is losing their minds because one person said, I don't want to be here on national television. Okay, that's great. That's great you don't want to be there. But it doesn't have to be headline news. It doesn't. But it is in the NFL because the NFL is king. And I thought it was huge news and major news that Julio doesn't want to be there. But there's a lot of factors that go into it. And there's a lot of factors, like we talked about, that go into him going to a different team. Some other factors that I am going to talk about are, how's the health? Now, we all know that the health of Julio Jones is a major factor when it comes to signing him somewhere big. So, like I mentioned before, the best ability is availability. So you're going to tell me that you need to do your research on this if you are a GM. If you're truly going to take Julio Jones, you need to know if he's healthy or not. Now, Jones, he's 32. He's missed half of the last season because of a hamstring injury. He's dealt with a foot, an ankle injury, and a hip injury in his career. But otherwise, he's been as durable, as stable, and as tough-minded veteran you can ask for. Now, another factor when it comes to guys signing another way is targets, especially targets in place. How much would Jones take away from other players and skew the offensive philosophy? I look, for example, say Jones goes to the San Francisco 49ers. They don't typically deploy 3-4 wide receivers. Not when they have marquee tight end George Kittle and a Pro Bowl fullback in Kyle Juszczyk. Now, in what it's worth, they usually are a run-first offense. And we all know that the number one draft pick they drafted, Brandon Ayuk, that they traded up for, is being groomed as a number one wide receiver. But Deebo Samuel is that number one type too, isn't he? With his blend of physical running and yards after catch ability, I would think that he would fit in nicely. And those two receivers don't have to have the ball in their hands to be successful and to help you play, help you be productive. Julio Jones doesn't have to have the ball in his hands too to help you be productive. What most people think of wide receivers as, catching divas who just only want to catch the rock and score touchdowns. No. That's not part of the game. Part of the game is blocking. And it takes a lot out of a receiver to block somebody. But Julio Jones is a great blocker. Just go see the film that Kyle Shanahan talked about when he was with the Falcons back as an offensive coordinator. Here's what else Shanahan said that 2018 Combine interview, the preview that I talked about earlier. So, he said, where people make a mistake is when they say, we need a big, tall, red zone target like Julio Jones. And then you go pay everybody else in the world who I can promise you isn't Julio Jones. Now, you can't go out and get a tight end. You can't go and get a guard. Yeah, you got that big guy, but it's got to be the right guy for the right system. You don't go, hey, we need a big guy. No, we need good wide receivers. And honestly, they come in all shape and sizes. So Kyle Shanahan said that in his 2018 Combine interview with the NFL, and he is 100% right. I could not agree with him more. It's like you don't put a puzzle piece in a wrong position. I look at it like going on a job interview or hiring somebody for a job. Now, you go through these interview processes, and we've all been there. We've all been through the interview process, and we all try to sell ourselves. But you have to take into account what that company is looking for. That company may be looking for someone who's strong, who's diligent, who's a good worker, who's a good team player, but also looking for other aspects as well. Like, for example, if you're a journalist, can they write good articles? Can they write grammatically correct articles? Can they find interesting scoops and interesting storylines? Can they connect with people on a deeper level? You have to take that into account. These jobs are out there, and these positions are going to be filled by the right candidate who has the right state of mind and the right attributes. You just can't hire somebody who has no experience and who's not the right fit. Because they could have all the experience in the world. They could be a great person. They could have so much experience in the field that you're trying to get into. But if they're not the right fit, if they don't have the right guy, the right person, the right woman, the right human in that position, they're not going to get filled. And that position is going to go to somebody else who's a better fit. And that's exactly what Kyle Shanahan is saying. Kyle Shanahan is basically saying, we need the right fit in our system. And a right fit for a Kyle Shanahan system, for a wide receiver, is a guy who's tall, who's fast, who has good hands, who's not afraid to get hit, who's not afraid to go over the middle, and who can block. Because I guarantee you, any NFL head coach, offensive coordinator, quarterback coach, any NFL head coach will say they need their guys to be football guys. They need their guys who are wide receivers to actually block downfield. Because many people think that when wide receivers are in the game, they don't block, they're just divas, they're just out there for show and to run and catch the ball. No, that's totally different. It's way different than what anybody believes. You get into an NFL locker room, you get into an NFL head coach room to their offense, they're going to talk to you about, can this wide receiver block? If when they're watching film, the first thing they look at, they don't look at physical tangibles. They don't look at how they can run routes. They look at that at the end, but I guarantee you, the first thing they watch on film is if they can block and how well they can block, and even if they make an attempt to block downfield. Because football is a violent game. And football, it takes everybody. Because if you're a running team like San Francisco is, like New England is, like LA is, if you're a running football team, you're going to need to block. I have to ask the question, does this guy want to block? And I've heard many answers of, yes, this guy loves to block. And you've seen film study on him. But you have to see it for your eyes only. Film doesn't lie. Don't get me wrong. The film doesn't lie. But you have to see it for your eyes only. You can tell a lot by a person, especially a football player, from their eye test. From the eye test that they pass. Are they physically capable of doing the dirty things, the little things that you need to do to win, like blocking? Julio Jones might be a fabulous wide receiver. He might be one of the best wide receivers of all time. But if he's not able to block, like, he hasn't shown this in the past. He's a great blocker. And you know what? He's going to make a lot of friends if you can block. And that's just what Kyle Shanahan is saying. They need the right system guy. If they have the right system guy, like they do now, if they can add another system guy who he knows can do well in his system, if he's a good fit, they're going to do well, and they might win the Super Bowl. But they got to be the right system guy. And we've seen Julio in Atlanta when they went to the Super Bowl. He was the right fit, and Kyle Shanahan loved him. But this has been going on for a while. And it will keep on going on for a while. You know, the All-Pro, he requested a trade a few months ago. And then the team agreed to listen to offers just now. So it's not like this is just major news that happened. This is just one little droplet of what we expect to happen. This is just moving the wheels in motion. Now Atlanta can finally say, okay, you want to hear trades for Julio Jones? Let me hear them. I guarantee you it's going to be for a first-round pick. Maybe a second-round pick. But it's going to be a haul, and Atlanta might get some big-time names. They probably should get some big-time names on the defensive side of the ball. Because offense, they have no worries. Calvin Ridley, and they have one of the best tight ends who I think will make the most impact for his team in Kyle Pitts, where they drafted at number 4. You still have a good quarterback in Matt Ryan, former MVP of the league. If you can get that defense settled, and you can get another guy for Julio Jones, if he's disgruntled, then I say, do it. Do it. If I'm an NFL franchise and I have an opportunity to get one of the perennial players in this league, one of the perennial players of all time, to go onto my team and to be under contract for the next 3 years under his prime, dude's only 32. You give up whatever you can. You give up as many draft picks as you can because you're going to win right now. He's going to make a major impact from the first day he steps off the plane to the first day into your organization. It's crazy. It's crazy how he's on the market. You know what else is crazy? How Deshaun Watson is on the market too. I can't believe this is happening. He's one of the better quarterbacks, if not one of the best dual-threat quarterbacks in our league. Now, Deshaun Watson, he said he won to attend OTAs. He still wants a trade. So there's no reason to think that Deshaun Watson would show up for Texans organized team activities. There's just no reason. The quarterback, in fact, won't be there at all, according to Tom Pelissero of the NFL Network. Now, if you haven't been following this story, he's been unhappy since his buddy DeAndre Hopkins and his pal J.J. Watt got moved to the Arizona Cardinals, and he has basically no star weapons around him. And I feel for the guy. I mean, it's just like the Aaron Rodgers situation all over again. This is a situation where a superstar is unhappy because his organization is not doing a good job to keep him happy. Now, he's a once-in-a-lifetime talent, I think, as well. He's a great dual-threat quarterback. He has all the skills. He passes the eye test. He's smart. He has all the intangibles. If he just has more guys around him, like I guarantee you, if Houston would have kept J.J. Watt, and if they would have kept DeAndre Hopkins, they would have been in the playoffs multiple years, maybe competing for a championship. That was one of the lethal duels out there. But their head coach was an idiot. Just saying. And now he doesn't want to stick around for the rebuild, because that's all Houston's going to be. Houston's going to be a rebuild. Now, we can talk about how he had allegations against him, and we'll get back to that in the next segment because it's a hot topic issue, and there seems to be a lot of those hot topic issues within the NFL when it comes to sexual abuse, when it comes to domestic violence, when it comes to players not being able to follow rules. And there's a lot of people in this league who have played, former players, who have been accused of domestic violence and all these crimes. And I think they're trying to get away with it, and I'm not sure it's fair. No, it's not fair. But it's interesting to talk about because that's the drama with the NFL. You have all these high major egos and all these alphas in one room competing with each other. They think they're basically God. These football players basically think they're God, and it's not the case. It's not the case, but it's interesting to see how it all plays out. It's going to be interesting, and we're going to talk about more of it. And we're also going to talk about the NFL season to come, and maybe way too early predictions coming up on the other side. Stay tuned.
This is your ultimate stop for everything sports. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Should I say more? From the NFL, MLB, the NBA to MMA, it's all in here. The Golden State Media Concepts Sports Podcast. Listen now.
Hey now, what's going on? Welcome back to the GSMC Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Happy Monday. Hopefully everyone enjoyed the show so far. We got the last segment, and you know what? We talked a lot about the NFL, and we're going to continue talking about the NFL because the NFL is the gift that just keeps on giving. It really does. There's so much to talk about within the NFL, and we already discussed the Julio Jones trade rumors and how that went down on the Undisputed, and how there's so many rumors flying around with all these superstar players. And we're going to get into the Deshaun Watson aspect and the Deshaun Watson story, because that's also a big storyline. But in previous segments, we talked about the NFL draft and how we got to give these guys a chance, these rookies a chance. We also talked about what you were going to give up for Julio Jones and what people will give up, because there's a line that shouldn't be crossed. If you're going to give up Julio Jones, you have to get something in return, and something big. You just can't give him like a second or third round pick. You're going to have to give up a first round pick, and we all know that he's a perennial all-star. He's a Hall of Famer to be. He's going to be a Hall of Famer, and you don't give up a second, a third, and a fourth round draft pick for this guy. You give up a first round draft pick, even maybe two. That's how good he is. And I'll be surprised if anybody gives up less than a 3 for him. But there's obviously going to be a high price to pay, and it's always a high price to pay when it comes to the best wide receiver in the game right now, because he is one of the top 5, if not the best wide receivers in the game right now. And it's crazy to think some of the places he'll go to. So the big storyline with that is he might go to San Francisco, he might go to Baltimore, he might go to Indianapolis, New England. It's just he wants out. And it's crazy to think. So now, we also talked about other things, but we're going to get into OTAs like we did before. And we're going to get into the Deshaun Watson, because that's a huge storyline too. He was obviously, a couple months ago, he was one of the hottest storylines out there in the NFL. Oh, Deshaun Watson, he's disgruntled, he's mad, he's upset with the Houston Texans. So what is he going to do? Now we're hearing that we have the whole aspect of the massage parlor incident and how he sexually abused all these massage parlors and all these clients and all their staff, and it's not a good look. It's not a good look for him. But you know what? I don't think we might not see him in a uniform next year, because OTAs have started and people are not showing up. And he's one of the biggest headlines. He doesn't want to show up for Houston Texans minicamp and organized team activities, because he doesn't want to be there. And we've seen this before throughout many people playing in the NFL. We've seen many players not show up and hold up because either A, they want more money, or B, they just flat out don't want to be there. And you know what? If I'm Houston and I'm seeing all this, and I'm seeing the video posted on social media, on Watson's social media a few days ago, showed him hard at work, preparing as if he's going to play in 2021, and preparing like he's not expected to play with the Texans again. I'm looking at that video, I'm saying, okay, despite all the off-field allegations and despite all the drama that is with him, I'm still looking for a first or second round pick for him. This guy, when healthy, when his mind's right, when he has players around him, he can do a lot of good things. He's a playoff-style quarterback. He's one of the best dual-threat quarterbacks I think no one is talking about right now. Everybody's talking about Patrick Mahomes and Lamar Jackson and Josh Allen. He's up there with one of the best dual-threat quarterbacks in the league. So if he gets his mind right, he can be lethal. Now, the NFL could eventually place Watson on a paid leave, pending the resolution of the 22 lawsuits against him. Now, nobody wants to see 22 lawsuits when they're looking to trade for a guy. There's always a red flag. So you got to weigh the pros and cons. A pro would be he's one of the best, if not the best dual-threat quarterback in the league right now. He's got everything. He's like a five-tool player. Now, when I mean five-tool player in baseball, it means he can hit, he can run, he can throw, he can field, and he can hit for power. Deshaun Watson, when healthy, when he's got players around him, he's a five-tool guy. He's a five-tool quarterback. He can do everything at the quarterback position on the football field. But the con, that is a major con, is these lawsuits against him. Now, we still have to see this all play out, but it's going to be crazy if somebody doesn't pass on him and somebody passes on him, If somebody passes on him and another team just takes a flyer on him, like the Kansas City Chiefs passed on Kareem Hunt, and the Cleveland Browns took a flyer on him, and they went to the playoffs. They had one of the best dynamic 1-2 punches with Nick Chubb and Kareem Hunt last year, and they paid dividends. They got the value out of Kareem Hunt because they took a flyer off him. Now, he had off-season issues. He had off-the-field issues with beating his girlfriend and his domestic violence. But this isn't the first time we've seen domestic violence in the league. There's been plenty of times where we've seen domestic violence. And you know what? I'm the type of person, I don't condone domestic violence. I just want to get that flat out right now. Domestic violence against anybody is not okay. It's not okay even if you're an NFL superstar. Just because you're a football player who plays in the NFL, the National Football League, any professional athlete, it doesn't give you the right to go ahead and do whatever you please. It just doesn't. But you know what? I'm an optimistic guy. I think everybody deserves the benefit of doubt. That's just me. I'm an optimistic guy. I'm going to give everybody the benefit of the doubt. And if you deserve a second chance, I believe it, because I believe everybody deserves a second chance. You just got to look at the record. This is the first time that's really come out. And 22 lawsuits against him. That's scary. I'm not sure what's going to happen with this case. We have to let the courts play out. But it's going to be interesting to see where this guy lands. Because we darn well know he's not going to go back to Houston no matter how much they want him. You can't build that relationship back. It's just a bridge that is burned. Even with a new head coach, even with a new GM. And he's one of those guys that I think will be able to have a great new beginning in a new change of scenery. Like I mentioned before, a change of scenery can do good. Like I mentioned with Sam Darnold, and I mentioned with Tom Brady, a new change of scenery can do wonders for a person. And when we all know that, So now the Texans apparently appear to have already moved on. They released Ryan Finley on Monday after signing free agent Jeff Driscoll and leaving the team with Tyrod Taylor, and a third-round choice of Davis Mills and Jeff Driscoll as quarterback. So you already have 3 quarterbacks on your roster right now. Deshaun will make it 4, and that's a crowded room. So they're going to bank on Tyrod Taylor, and they're going to bank on Davis Mills, the rookie QB, and Jeff Driscoll to go in and compete for that starting job. Now, I don't think the Houston Texans are going to be any good this year. I really don't. They've had some few key additions of the offseason. Tyrod Taylor, adding Davis Mills. You had Mark Ingram coming back from from Baltimore. But I don't think that they're going to be any good because they basically traded their best players 2 years ago with DeAndre Hopkins and last year with J.J. Watt leaving in free agency, and having them basically walk over to Arizona and say, here, we'll play for you. We want to get out of Houston. That's a dumpster fire. Don't expect Houston to do anything this year, especially when you don't have your best quarterback and your best player eventually leaving. It's not a good look. It's not a good look for Houston Texan fans. I'm sorry. It's just not. You got to hope for the future. You got to pile up the draft picks. Maybe you start tanking right now. Now, I'm not a proprietor of tanking, but you have to know when to tank, and you have to know how to do it. There's a certain way to do it, and there's a wrong way to do it. If you're not doing it correctly, then you should get fined. You really should. Now, if you have talent on the field that's not as good enough and that's not up to snuff for these other teams, then of course you're going to try your best, but you know what? You have to look for the future. It's a now league, it's a what have you done for me lately league, and it's a win now league. And the Houston Texans are just not going to be able to win now, basically just off their talent. They're just not. They need a splashy move in free agency, and it's going to be hard because you already have your star quarterback right now who's technically on the roster going to be moved. It's going to be crazy to see all these people moving from Houston. And it's just not a good look, honestly, on both sides. It's not a good look, and if I was a Houston Texans fan, which I'm not, it's just going to be a rough season. What's also going to be interesting to see is how this Julio Jones plays out, how the Houston Texans deal with Deshaun Watson. And it's also interesting to see what's going to happen with Aaron Rodgers. There's so many storylines that are in the NFL right now. And it's just the gift that keeps on giving. It really is. So, we don't know where these guys are going to go. We don't know if Aaron Rodgers is truly happy. We don't know. But what he said is that he's truly disgruntled. And you know what? It's going to be interesting to see because everything's going to happen around, June 1st. We got a couple more weeks, but everything is truly going to happen around June 1st because once June 1st hits, people have already been in OTAs for a while. And we're going to get into OTAs because there's some teams out there who are just defying the odds, and it's really great for their chemistry. But once June 1st hits, everything kind of gets into motion. We have the preseason games, and we have training camp coming up. And Adam Schefter said that once June 1st hits, that's when everything's going to go down for the Julio Jones trade. So that's a date to keep out because we don't know what's going to happen. And we're sitting on our couches, on our phones, checking Twitter, checking Instagram, checking these social media platforms to see where's this guy going to go. I'm super excited to see where Julio Jones is going to go. I'm super excited to see what's going to happen with the Deshaun Watson. And that case has to be cleared, but it's going to be interesting. And you know what? We're talking about it. May 24th. We're talking about it in May. There's other sports out there that we could be watching. The NBA wishes that everybody had their eyeballs on the playoffs, and the Major League Baseball wishes that everybody had their eyes on the start of the season. But it truly shows right now, just because we are so infatuated and we're talking about it as headline news, as the Julio Jones news breaks, as the Deshaun Watson news breaks, as the Aaron Rodgers news breaks, we are talking about it, and the NFL truly loves it. They love it because, A, they truly know they are the king when it comes to professional sports in the United States and even overseas in London and in all these other countries where they follow American tackle football. It's crazy. It's crazy to see how these stories are front page news stories, like I see on the New York Times or the Wall Street Journal or all these ESPN corporations, all these media corporations talking about what happened, not on the field. They're not talking about mini camps. They're not talking about organized team activities, which is a major highlight within the NFL offseason. They're not talking about actual football being played. They're talking about offseason allegations. They're talking about trade rumors, and it's big-time news. And if I was other corporations when it comes to professional sports, if I was the NBA, if I was Major League Baseball, if I was the NHL, I would be concerned right now. And honestly, I would try to ask them, wow, how do you do it? And how can we improve? Because right now, when it's May, and the Major League story on ESPN, on CBS, on these sports pages, in the news, is the NFL, is Julio Jones, where is Aaron Rodgers going to end up? Where is Deshaun Watson going to go? What's his story going to be like? When it's off-season acquisitions being the major news, instead of NBA playoffs, instead of Major League Baseball season, instead of the NHL playoffs, I would be concerned if I was those other leagues. I'm just saying, when you have stories that are not even about football being played on the field, but accusations of a sexual misconduct with one quarterback, and where's another wide receiver who's a Hall of Famer calls into a radio show and a television show talking about where I'm going to go and I'm out of there. It's crazy to me that you see all these storylines during the offseason about the NFL and how they basically are dominating the news cycle, especially in the sports world. And you have front page headlines, Julio says I'm out of there, or Deshaun Watson's unhappy, or Aaron Rodgers is disgruntled. When you have other sports who are playing physical NBA playoff games, physical Major League Baseball regular season games, and the biggest news everybody wants to talk about is where's Julio going to go? And why did Aaron Rodgers say he's disgruntled? And what's going to happen with Deshaun Watson? It's crazy to me to see these storylines break and to see the NFL being just a juggernaut. And we're not even talking about on-field play. There's organized team activities right now, which I'm super excited about because I was led to believe by the media that players are unhappy with OTAs and players are unhappy with mini camps and how their contracts are being structured. And they need more protection. They need more guaranteed contracts. But I look on the other hand and I see all these OTAs around the league and I see the participation. It's up within 85 to 95%. Now, there's going to be some people who just don't want to go to OTAs, and some people who just don't want to go to minicamps who aren't rookies. We're talking veterans because, A, they just never do, like Aaron Rodgers. Aaron Rodgers never goes to OTAs because, A, he's one of the greatest quarterbacks of all time. B, he's in physical peak condition. And C, he wants out of there. So I understand why he wants not to participate. But you see other guys around the league who are veterans, who are going to organized team activities, and who are actually happy to be there. Like, we were led to believe the NFL Players Union and the NFL were at a disagreement. They were not happy with each other. They needed stuff to happen right away in their contract situations and with basically the way the NFL runs its organization. They're not happy. But then I see on the other side, people are happy in OTAs. People are excited to be there. People are posting on Instagram, Facebook, social media, saying, oh, it's great to be here. It's great to be actually on the field. Now, it's great to be on the field when you have shorts and when you have jerseys on and people wearing backwards hats, people wearing sunglasses, and people aren't getting hit. But you know what? When the pads start to come on, when the pads start popping, when everybody starts to get into that hitting mode and we all know the season is just around the corner, there's going to be some people who'll be like, nah, man, this ain't for me. this ain't for me, and it's going to separate the men from the boys. Now, they're all men in the NFL. I understand that. But it's going to separate who really wants to be there and who doesn't want to be there. For example, it's going to show us if Tim Tebow really wants to be there for padded minicamps and padded OTAs and organized team activities and padded practices. Because playing tight end, that's not a fun thing to do. And it's a huge story whether he's going to make the team. I'm not sure he's going to make the squad. I really am not. But it's going to be interesting to see. And you know what? It's going to be headline news. It's going to be headline news on ESPN if he makes a 53-man roster. Now you got 90 guys coming up and playing right now on the active roster because they need bodies. People are going to go down during OTAs. People are going to go down when it starts to have hitting and padded practices. That's just inevitable in football. It's inevitable that people are going to get hurt. But what's interesting to me is to see the reaction within the players in the league. They're saying something one day, and then the next day, they're meaning something totally different. It's going to be interesting to see, and we're going to talk about it more. We're going to talk a lot about the NFL and the days coming down the road, because the NFL is probably the most dominant sports organization in the world. Besides FIFA, overseas, in America, in the Western United States, in Western civilization, the NFL is king. And you know what? That's the way it should be, because we love football. We love it. We can't get enough. I know I can't get enough, and I know you can't get enough. That's because you're here. That's because you love football. Like me, we're football fanatics, and we can't get enough. Well, that's all the time I got for today. Thank you for listening. Thank you for tuning in to the GSMC Football Podcast, brought to you by the GSMC Podcast Network. Now, before I go, I want to remind you, please subscribe to our social media pages, our Twitter, our Instagram, our Facebook. Subscribe and hit that follow button for our Twitter page, GSMC Football, on Twitter. You won't regret it. We tweet a lot. We give a lot of great content. And remember to go to our page and leave a nice review. That really helps us out. So, for the meantime, I'm Bryan. Be well, stay safe, stay healthy, and we'll see you on the other side.
You've been listening to the Golden State Media Concepts Football Podcast, part of the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. You can find this show and others like it at www.gsmcpodcast.com. Download our podcast on iTunes, Stitcher, SoundCloud, and Google Play. Just type in GSMC to find all the shows from the Golden State Media Concepts Podcast Network. From movies to music, from sports to entertainment, and even weird news. You can also follow us on Twitter and on Facebook. Thank you, and we hope you have enjoyed today's program.